Oh, I left my shirt out. Oh, Lord. This is my welding shirt. It's a little wet. It's a cold, rainy day today. So it's a good day to come in the studio or the foundry and do some welding. This is a burn pit. Well, it's really a pipe cap. These are used in refineries to pressure test pipe before it's put together and put in service. So they just weld this cap on the end of whatever size pipe they have, or I'm sure they're different sizes, do the pressure test, and then they cut them off and continue with what they're doing. And my son's neighbor works in a plant, and they just did a big, I think they call them turnarounds, where they upgrade things. And they ended up with about 100 of these, and we ended up with 2 of them. So it's a burn pit. It's good to go, except it'll fill up with rainwater, so it definitely got to cut holes in the bottom. And 2, it's nice if it has handles, because it's almost impossible to move the thing. It's very heavy. And 3, it's nice if it has legs to get it up out of the mud a little bit. So, and 4, it looks like Ray Charles was operating a torch that cut this thing loose. So it'd be nice if it just was kind of flat. So I'm gonna cut this flatter. I'm gonna burn some holes for drainage. And I'm gonna put some legs on it. I'm gonna put some handles on it. And I should be able to finish all that today, because none of it has to be very pretty. And then it'll be a real live burn pit for out in front of the teeny house, up under the trees. So we're using a 4-foot level. I got it, as level as the average would let me level it. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. And I decided I want to cut this much off. This is a good average between cutting a lot off on some sides and cutting like almost nothing off on the other side. And I'm going to start off with the oxyacetylene torch. My plasma torch, I don't know, last time I used it struggled with this thick stuff. So, and of course I struggle with the torch, but we're going to give it a shot with the torch. And I hope I don't run out of oxygen, because I don't have a ton of it, but if I can go slow and steady, this will go pretty fast.
This process of cutting with the oxyacetylene torch, you're really burning the steel. At first you just put the torch on the steel until you get a molten puddle. And at that point the steel's a little unstable because of oxygen in the air, and it starts going bad. When you get it good and hot and you get a little puddle, you press the little lever on the torch and it shoots pure oxygen right down the middle of the flame. And the carbon that's in the steel, it burns and goes away. So it's really a burning process, and which is why it doesn't work on stainless steel. Stainless steel doesn't have enough carbon to burn with a torch. Now my shaky hands are not making this any easier, that's for sure, but muddled through. The little board helped a lot by keeping it level up. I didn't have to try to follow a white line.
So I'm gonna make 2 handles out of the coil rod, so they'll be like come out a couple inches and go down a few inches and go back. But on the straight part where you would grab it, this stuff's hard on your hands. This thing's really, really heavy, so I'm gonna slide a piece of 3/4 inch galvanized pipe over it, so you got a smooth spot to grab. I'll make a pair of it, and I'll cut a notch where I can get more weld than just butt welding it. Because again, this thing, I don't know what it weighs, but it's really, really heavy. So I took the 3/4 inch pipe and I cut 2 pieces of pipe off of it, and they're long enough for a 2-handed grip. Be more comfortable than trying to hold it with one hand, I think.
Coil rod is used in the concrete construction industry for form accessories. It doesn't have a sharp thread like a regular V thread or an Acme thread. It's got a rolled roundy thread, and the nuts and other hardware fit on it pretty loose. So when you use these things and you pour concrete and you splash concrete all over them or paint all over them, and you wait a week and you come back and it has all this dried concrete on there, you can just kind of hit it with a hammer and it comes loose and the nuts still operate. If you were trying to use like a regular all-thread rod from Home Depot for this purpose or different concrete purposes, you'd be cutting it with a torch every time because you wouldn't be able to get the nuts off. But anyway, in order to take this abuse, I think it's hardened steel or tool steel. It's definitely not mild steel because you can smash it with a hammer and the threads don't bend. So because of that, I was using a little extra heat to bend it. I was bending it real slow. I didn't want it to crack, so I put a lot of heat on it and bent it real slow, and I didn't get any cracks, and I think we're really good. So after the first end is bent roughly 90 degrees, I slipped the handle on it, and I got the end propped up so it's relatively horizontal with the floor or the table, and then I bend the other one around, and then take a measurement and cut it to length. It's nice to have lots of length when you're bending something so you don't have to get up in the hot part.
One handle down, one to go. Now this is longer than I'll use, but it just made it easier to put the whole thing in the vise and hold tight. I'll trim them off when we get them both installed. I have laid out my handles. They're more or less on the center line. This board's pretty much on the center line. It's hard to measure, you know. This gap is the same on both sides. Measuring from pipe to pipe is pretty parallel. None of this makes a whole lot of difference. So I'm going to cut a notch in the plug for the coil rod to set down flush. And I say I can cut this with the grinder, and then the bottom I'll burn with the torch. And we'll set them back in here and weld the donkey out of them, and then I'll trim this off after the fact. Should just be able to, these things are still pretty hot. I should just be able to flip them over and not take them off. I ended up cutting them with the torch because if I'd used a grinder, it would have vibrated a lot and all this stuff would have fallen down. So use the torch. They're fitting fair, good enough for intended purpose. And I'm not out of oxygen yet, thankfully. So we're going to start the welding machine and weld these into place. I'll cut them off flush when we get a lot of weld on them, and then I'll put some more weld on them because they need to not fall. Okay, handles in place and welded pretty well from the top and from the inside. Now I need to flip this bad boy over so that I can weld legs on it and burn holes for drainage. It's pretty freaking heavy too. I'm gonna use my hoist.
So I've got two straps on it, one on each handle. I thought it would hang more vertically like this, and frankly I wasn't completely confident in the little bit of welds I had on the handles. So I did this and I picked it up, and you can kind of see that I was having trouble. It wasn't wanting to flip. I was trying to push it and lower at the same time, and it wasn't flipping. It just kept getting lower and lower. So I got one of those little cable come-alongs that are pretty worthless unless you need one, and then they're invaluable. Anyway, and I hooked it to the chain and to the table, and I used it to pull the trolley towards the green door, and it actually flipped quite well that way. And I came close to breaking off my my little air header down there, because that's where I plug in all my air tools. And at one point I had all the weight on that manifold, and it's not secured that well, so that didn't break, thankfully. Got it flipped. And we put the cable come along away until the next time that I'm in a bind and have to have a cable come along. But he tried to whoop me, but I didn't let it. We got it flipped.
So my plan for the legs, fairly simple. 3 pieces of, this is probably 1.5-inch pipe. Like, divide it around, and maybe, I don't know, 6 inches long, just enough to keep the bottom out of the dirt. 3 or 4 inches, it's gonna be plenty. So, where to put them is anybody's guess. I guess about way up here. So I would like to draw a circle around here, equidistant from the top or parallel with the ground, and then divide that up into thirds, and that will tell me where I'm going to put the legs. So I used the Measure Master 2000 to get an approximate circle. It's the same elevation from the ground all the way around. It's pretty close, plus or minus a 1/2 inch. Gotta remember this thing's gonna be sitting on dirt, so it's not super critical. Made a decision. The first leg is gonna go here. So now I need to figure out 3 measurements, or a measurement, so I can go around this thing 3 times and it'll even up. This is probably gonna be trial and error. And my tape's about to break, as like everything in my shop, but when I get 3 equal, when I get a measurement that divides the circle into 3 equal parts, I know where the other 2 legs need to go. Okay, got a second try. First was 20, and that left this measurement back here too short, so I reduced it to 19 from here to here, and here to here, and that gave me 19 from there to there. So that's where they're gonna go. I made the lines long because I gotta sand the paint off and I didn't want to lose the location. So I'm gonna grind some paint and make my first weld. Ready to weld my first leg, and it just goes, I'm gonna have to cut the ends square, and then they just go, it goes perpendicular to the base, so I just need to hold it and get some tacks on it and weld it, and then I'll cut it to length after the fact. With the leg welded on, I just took a random piece of steel because the height was more or less what I'm looking for. And with the 2 foot level, I just leveled across. And when it read level, I put a chalk mark, and I did both sides. So I'm gonna cut these off, and that's gonna be how long the legs are gonna be. And it'll be the same for all 3 legs. Okay, I have 3 legs. One of them's special, one of them's galvanized. Just trying to use what I had. And I'm gonna grind the tops of the legs, which will be the bottom of the legs, kind of flat, and I wanna put a plate, because this will be on dirt, and it's very heavy, and I think it'll be less likely to sink if it's got a little plate on them. And then burn some drain holes, and except for maybe touching up the paint, I'm done. I wanna make the pads bigger than the feet. Maybe like this big. Maybe like this big, which means I'd be welding upside down, which I can't really do very well. So I'm gonna flip it back over, cut 3 pads and slide them under, and then I'll be welding downhill. But before I do, I'm gonna go ahead and burn the holes in the bottom. I'm gonna use my Oxy torch. When I did my son's, I did a similar one for my son. The plasma torch had a hard time getting through this heavy metal. Let's get the torch going.
They took quite a bit of heat on this first hole to get the thing warm enough to get a puddle to blast the oxygen to cut. Now the second 2, the whole area was starting to get kind of hot, so they went a lot quicker. But this first one, I had to put the heat on it for a while.
The welding and cutting is done. I'm gonna put it on the floor and try to knock off some of these Sharpies with the big grinder, the 5-inch grinder, clean up those holes on the bottom. And I will paint the legs because they're like 1/4 the thickness of this. This is gonna instantly burn the paint off, but the legs won't get that hot, and I want them to last a long time, so I'll put a coat of paint on them, but not today because it's cold and misty. So I'll pick it up one more time, put it on the ground, and get the big grinder and grind for a little bit. So I added this little I-beam up here a couple of years ago when I was doing a big bronze piece for my wife that I couldn't handle without mechanical advantage, and I had a conflict with the light. So what I did was, and I think it's pretty ingenious, even for an old guy, the light pivots out the way. Light's on a big giant hinge and it swings out of the way so that I can pick up stuff with the hoist and put it on the ground. And then I can put the light back. And it works like really well. Let's start grinding. Ooh, that was a grind. That was a pun also. So I ground the perimeter. It's not so smooth you want to set your naked behind on it, but there's no longer Sharpies that'll grab your shirt sleeve or your pants. And that's what I was after. So it's done, with the exception of some paint. I think I'm gonna put it outside next to the grapple, and next time it's dry enough to head to the country, we'll take them both.